Hello and welcome back to YellowCard Vanguard. Zystral here with Judge Corner. This series is aimed at those of you who are looking to gain a deeper insight into the rules, either to improve yourself as a player, or you're aiming to become a Bushiroad judge later down the line. The purpose of this series is not to answer whatever random ruling questions you have, but if you do have a specific query that you want to get a second opinion on, then feel free to leave a comment. The only stipulation is that if you don't like what you hear, that's not my problem, and you relinquish the right to complain. Today's episode is about the end phase. The end phase is a rare and mysterious creature whose existence has baffled many a scholar for years. Well, today we're going to unravel its mysteries once and for all. Well, at least until the rules change for whatever reason. Let's just get straight into it. This is an excerpt from the comprehensive rules on the end phase. 6.8 End phase. 6.8.1 The phase in which several actions are resolved at the end of a turn. This phase is done in the following order. 6.8.1.1 The turn player performs the following in the order shown. 6.8.1.1.1.1 Put all G units on the Vanguard and Rearguard circles into the G zone in a face-up state. 6.8.1.1.2 Return all locked cards and deleted units on that player's field to a normal state by turning the cards face up. 6.8.1.2 Each active automatic ability with the timing when a card is unlocked, when a card is put to face up, and when put to G zone triggers are put to standby. Then resolve the check timing. 6.8.1.3 Each active automatic ability with the timing at the beginning of end phase and at the end of turn that have not become standby in this end phase become standby. 6.8.1.4 Resolve the checking timing. After completing all actions in the check timing, all effects with until the end of this turn will cease to exist. 6.8.1.5 At this point, if there are no automatic abilities standing by, no rule actions to resolve, and no active automatic abilities with at the beginning of end phase and at the end of turn that have not become standby during this end phase, the opponent of the current turn player becomes the new turn player and the game advances to the next turn stand phase. This turn ends. Otherwise, go back to 6.8.1.2. 6.8.1.1 is relatively straightforward. You put your stride away before anything else happens, and then face down cards turn face up. Note that these actions happen one at a time, and each individual action can cause other effects to trigger. So even though nothing goes on until the check timing at 6.8.1.2, this is how things like Alter Ego and Alter Ego Neo skills can actually trigger, because you return the stride before your heart or the new grade 3 GB2's effect sees the things unlocking. Chaos brings in a few other oddities, but nothing too home-wrecking. It behaves largely the same. All the auto abilities that would have triggered at either step in 6.8.1.1 go on standby simultaneously. We can resolve them the way we usually would, and then if anything else goes on standby as a result of them resolving, because we're still in the check timing, those things will be resolved in turn. So we're all good. I want to take a moment here to pause and talk about Ferniguez. His skill triggers when he returns to the G zone from the Vanguard circle, so at 6.8.1.1.1 he will trigger. In the case where the Great Nature player has a locked board and strides Ferniguez, there is some cool stuff that will happen at the end step. As per 6.8.1.1.1, Ferniguez will trigger. Immediately after that, in 6.8.1.1.2, things unlock. Chaos triggers. Then, as per 6.8.1.2, resolve check timings for these skills. So Ferniguez resolves first because of active turn player priority. So you pay Counterblast 1 and Soul Blast 1, but then what happens? Well, your things don't immediately die because we're not at 6.8.2.1.3 yet, so it's not the end of turn yet. Thus, you don't actually get to countercharge, soul charge 5 and draw 5. This is because Ferniguez's skill does what we refer to as setting up a delayed trigger, to use magic terms. The Vanguard terminology is timed triggers, and as per the comprehensive rules, in section 8.6.6, some effects create automatic abilities that trigger at a later point in the game. This is called a timed trigger. Timed triggers trigger only once if not specified. An important thing to know about timed triggers is that regardless of what happened to the card or ability that set up the timed trigger in the first place, the timed trigger will always attempt to resolve no matter what. This is what led us to that good old Mellum TikTok interaction, especially versus Denial Griffin. So in this case, when the Great Nature player resolves Ferniguez, nothing immediately happens, because all Ferniguez does is set up a delayed trigger. Thus, we can go on to resolve Chaos's effects, and if they're playing the good old Chaos Breaker Dragon instead of Chaos Breaker Crisis, they can definitely Soul Blast 5 to kill 5 and draw 5, leaving the Great Nature player to get nothing from Ferniguez. Of course, if it's Crisis, only one of them will die, so the Great Nature player can still countercharge, soul charge and draw 4 times off everything else dying. So that's the first chunk of the end phase done. Let's move on to the real meat and bones. 6.8.1.3 and 6.8.1.4. Quite a few things happen here actually, a lot of which are mostly relevant to the Great Nature and the Grand Blue players. As I'm sure some of you are aware, there's a bit of an oddity when it comes to the hollow and the end phase, but we'll get to that in a second. We just talked about time triggers, so I do have a quick bone to pick with Bushiroad here in that the rules also failed to explicitly mention that time triggers also go on standby at this step. While they are technically a subset of auto abilities, they don't exist in print the way others do on cards, yet they still go on standby and resolve just like everything else, and can be arranged and resolved in turn just like everything else. Just be aware that if you have a bunch of Great Nature effects that say at the end of turn retire this unit all on standby, you can resolve in whatever order you want. Resolving one will cause the rest to not work, because obviously there's nothing to retire anymore, which is why you should probably resolve Fernie Guess first. But the point remains, just in case there's some other shenanigans that interact with each other. So funnily enough, on the topic of time triggers and at the end of turn, we now come to the elephant in the room, hollow. So you may have heard that if you use old Night Rose's GB2 on your Grenache, you will get to countercharge 4. But if you use Night Rose's GB2 on Negralazy, you won't get a refund the second time. Let's jump into this a little bit. The important distinction here is that Negralazy's effect gives them a red until end of turn text. This is different to Grenache, who simply has a straightforward ability that triggers at the end of turn. Rather than try to explain to you the differences between them, their nuances, or the mechanics between point 3 and point 4, I'll just jump straight in and explain why these cards behave the way they do. So let's look at Grenache first. You call Grenache. His hollow skill goes on standby. You resolve it. Grenache becomes hollow state and a time trigger has been set up which says at the beginning of the end phase, retire this unit. Now if Grenache isn't there for whatever reason, this won't activate, that's fine. But he's still here. We get to the end step. 6.8.1.3 makes the time trigger go on standby. We go to 6.8.1.4 and the time trigger resolves, which causes Grenache to die. Because he was retired due to his hollow ability's time trigger, his other auto skill goes on standby, as well as Night Rose's GB2. We are still in the check timing of 6.8.1.4 here, and because there's still an ability on standby, the check timing is extended and we resolve the skills. Alright, so we countercharge 2. We then move on to resolve Night Rose's GB2. Everything's fine. We mill 3, we call back Grenache, and his hollow ability triggers again. Thus, because it's still on standby, the check timing is still extended. We resolve his hollow ability and move on. This hollow ability has resolved, and what it's done is set up another time trigger that retires this unit at the beginning of the end phase. However, this ability has not gone on standby because it's missed the timing given to it in 6.8.1.3. Therefore, because there's no other abilities on standby, the check timing ends. Because there's nothing else to clear away, especially no until end of turn effects, we move on to 6.8.1.5. This is where the second hollow's time trigger now says, hey, don't forget about me. As a result, we go back to 6.8.1.2, which then moves on to 6.8.1.3, and this new time trigger goes on standby and finally gets to resolve. And then we continue as before, countercharging 2, except this time not triggering Night Rose's GB2 because it is once per turn. I'm going to go on a quick tangent here while I can. Night Rose's GB2 is once per turn. This will soon be irrelevant when the rule change goes into effect, and I'll probably make a video covering that anyway, even though others have already done it when the news broke the first time. But for now, once per turn works in such a way that the first time the ability goes on standby, whether or not you make the optional choice of paying a cost or choosing to fully resolve the effect or not, the ability is considered to have activated, and thus will never go on standby again that turn. That is, the first time you have an opportunity to use a once per turn is the only time, which means that if either Chaos's unlock skill is resolved at this stage, Night Rose has to decide whether she wants to use the GB2 to revive those units at all or not. This is because Chaos retires the unit that has unlocked. Therefore, it is a unit being retired, therefore it will activate Night Rose. If Night Rose chooses not to revive whatever Chaos retires, then tough shit. That said, Night Rose still has a line of play where if there are units that are unlocking but not being killed with Chaos, either because the original Chaos Breaker Dragon doesn't have soul, or if there are multiple unlocks in a crisis, then Night Rose can resolve her GB2 at the 6.8.1.2 check timing as a result of Chaos's retire, and then use her GB2 to call over the other units that got unlocked, triggering Hollow, which will then cause the unit to die at the next check timing. Thus way, the board is cleared at the end of the turn, meaning Chaos has to work a bit harder to get the full lock against Night Rose. Anyway, back to the topic at hand. We've now covered why Grenache works, and it's quite straightforward. But now, Negralazy is where things get a little bit weirder. Let's just step through that now. So you call Negralazy, 2 auto abilities go on standby here, his Hollow and then his costed ability. Let's resolve the Hollow first because it's a little bit easier to manage. Then you resolve his other ability. You pay the cost, reanimate a dude, get 2k, and some red text for the turn. Nice. The red text is an auto ability that says, when this unit is retired due to the hollow ability, countercharge and soul charge. In the purposes of gameplay, you might as well treat this red text as an extra skill that exists on the card temporarily. Keep that in mind. So it's similar to Grenache. Or well, the wording is similar to Grenache. But it doesn't work like Grenache because it's red text. So let's move on to the end phase now and we'll see exactly why that is. 6.8.1.3 makes the hollows trigger time trigger standby, okay. It resolves in 6.8.1.4 and Negralazy dies. Just like with Grenache, you have two auto abilities that go on standby, Night Rose and Negralazy. Let's resolve Negralazy first for simplicity reasons. So we countercharge one and soul charge one. Then we go on to resolve Night Rose. Okay, this works out as well. We mill 3 and call back Negralazy. And just like the first time we called him, he's got two auto seals on standby, his hollow and his other effect. Let's resolve the hollow again first. You would never actually do this, but for the sake of example and showing you what would happen, we're also going to choose to resolve Negralazy's other skill for the second time. I mean, why would you actually do this? Maybe you just want the extra plus off a Cannoneer, I don't know, whatever. Anyway, Negralazy does his thing, reanimates a dude, gains more red text. At this point, just like with Grenache, we've cleared away the active stack of standby abilities. Sure, again, there's a time trigger from Hollow that says I need to kill Negralazy, but that will reactivate when we restart the end phase from 6.8.1.2 due to 6.8.1.5, just like with Grenache. However, Negralazy has gained 2k and a red text ability from his skill that only lasts until the end of turn, and as we're aware, 6.8.1.4 specifically states that these cease to exist once the check timing of 6.8.1.4 has resolved. So, whereas with Grenache we didn't have anything to clear away because there was no until end of turn, here we do. And because we've just finished the check timing in 6.8.1.4, it means that when 6.8.1.5 rolls around and says, hey, this hollow time trigger still needs to go off, let's take it from the top, Negralazy is now just a 9k vanilla without his on-death auto, but still marked for death by his hollow ability. That is, he has lost the red text by the time the end phase starts the second time, as it were. This is why you don't gain the refund twice. There are a few other points about how the end of turn behaves similarly to the end of battle in the case of repeating check timings, and the fact that you could theoretically loop the end step forever because of how you always go back over it again and put abilities on standby all over again, but those are far less important. For now, it's okay to just be aware of those cases, and what I've explained today should at least make it easier for you to grasp those situations if they ever come up. Hopefully I won't have to redo this video in a few years when Bushiroad decides to completely overhaul the rules, but we'll just have to cross our fingers. This has always been one of the weirder points of the rules, especially in the case of Negralazy, but it usually makes enough sense that you don't need to dissect in the way we've done today. But occasionally things break down and we have to go step by step. Thanks for watching, that will be it for this time, and once again, don't forget to check out our social media links below, give us the like, the subscribe, click the bell button, all the usual stuff, and as always, we'll see you next time.